From secret bases and treasure to entire lost battlefields, here are 9 amazing unexpected military discoveries. Number 9. Crashed American plane in India. World War II saw pilots taking to the skies over some pretty tough environments. One such place was Northeast India, where an area known as the Aluminium Trail is found. Why is it called that? The reason is rather grim. So many planes crashed there, it's a macabre collection of aircraft parts and other litter from military mishaps. Adventurer Shawar Hussain reported in 2019 about tracking down one of these lost planes. He ventured into the state of Arunachal Pradesh, where it's believed a majority of the flyers went down. An extraordinary 500 or more military men met their makers in the mountains and jungle below. Hussain received word that something had been found, so set off on a multi-day trek where he encountered blood-sucking leeches, treacherous terrain, and other threats. When he got to his destination, he discovered the remains of a B-24 Liberator bomber plane used by the Americans. Bits of it were strewn across the area, where they'd become part of the landscape. In one example, trees had grown over propellers. The 8 brave men who were in this plane were helping China defend itself from the Japanese invasion in January 1944. They died far from home, but their contribution will never be forgotten. Number 8. Eora Creek battlefield. The brutal conflict between Australian and Japanese forces at Kokoda in Papua New Guinea in 1942 resulted in many casualties. What took place near the location of Eora Creek was just one bloody chapter of the Allied war in the Pacific, but one that was shrouded in mystery. There was a big question over where exactly the fighting took place amongst the Owen Stanley Mountains. This detail remained elusive until 2010. Ex-Australian Army Captain Brian Freeman went looking for the site, working closely with the local Alola villagers. He finally uncovered what has been described as a living museum. 79 Australian soldiers and around 69 Japanese troops met their deaths, as the latter defended their strategic position. Objects such as guns, ammunition, and helmets were found on the plateau, together with the bodies themselves. The fallen were repatriated, and the area appears to be preserved as a reminder of dark times past. Number 7. Florida grenade incident. It's incredible to think that, even 75 years after the end of World War II, people are still stumbling upon unexploded devices. Now, if you found a hand grenade while out on your travels, you'd probably take a few steps back and call the authorities, right? Well, I'm sorry to say not everyone thinks like that. The next story took place just last year in Miami. An anonymous couple were fishing with a magnet when they pulled up a rusty old grenade. What a dramatic find! Instead of freaking out and dropping it back in the drink, they stuck it in a bucket, put the bucket in the back of their vehicle. Yes, you heard that right. And then decided to take a trip to Taco Bell, which was 17 miles away. It was then that they thought it might be a good time to call the cops. The restaurant was cleared and a potential major tragedy avoided. Taco Bell famously features in the explosion-laden Stallone movie Demolition Man. It looks like this was certainly a case where life nearly imitated art. What would you do if you found an unexploded grenade in a weird location? I hope you wouldn't just take it in your car and drive around. Let me know how you'd respond in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. There are lots more amazing videos coming soon. Number 6. Hitler's gold. War isn't all about material like bombs, bullets, and tanks. There's usually a hell of a lot of money involved as well, not to mention treasures from the art world and elsewhere that armies had their eyes on. One of the most notorious elements of the Second World War was Nazi gold. In 2017, a stash was found by an intrepid explorer. But there's a twist in the tale, as you'll discover. A treasure seeker named Hans Gluck, aged in his 70s, spent a sizable portion of his life trying to trace a wartime hoard containing extremely valuable items like gold and artworks. The collection was part of the Nazis' ill-gotten gains and featured things that had been stolen from Jewish properties. These were on their way to the Alps at the end of the war, where the Führer's beaten men were planning to hide out. The train carrying the treasure was attacked, and the hoard taken by Germans to the woods of Bavaria. Obviously, this is a big place, and when Hans Gluck worked out where it was, he set off to claim it. However, there was a problem. The person who owned the land didn't exactly hit it off with Gluck, and refused to let him dig up the goodies. With a price tag of around $640 million, the explorer was not amused. Number 5. Tank bunkers. It seems like a crazy idea, but burying a tank so it could be used as a fort proved very useful to armies around the world. How did it all start? In World War I, the French military decided to turn their FT-17s into underground defense turrets. This model of tank was perfect for the job as it could rotate, a new development at that time. From there, other armies from Belgium and the Soviet Union began adapting their old vehicles for use as turrets. These were essentially portable powerhouses and took a reported 3 hours plus to get into the ground. In some cases, the entire tank would be lowered inside and surrounded with concrete after the engine and tracks were taken off. Once the Germans got in on the act, they did things a little differently. A 2-story box was constructed that the turret rested on, so it was like a weird kind of house planted in the middle of the battlefield, only one with an enormous Panther gun instead of a roof. It must have been surreal finding these turrets sticking up out of the earth years later. It kind of looks like a tank maybe sank in quicksand or something, but no. This was a deliberate and highly effective way of keeping the enemy at bay. I'm genuinely impressed by the military genius at work with this innovation. Number 4. World War II film rolls. Just when you think you've seen everything World War II has to offer, along comes a big surprise. The conflict was a terrible period in human history, but numerous artists sought to paint pictures and take photographs of what was happening. Some were famous, and some were anonymous. One such anonymous person, an American soldier, took no less than 31 rolls of film, depicting what life was like on the ground for soldiers and the general population. This priceless and deeply personal record may never have seen the light of day, were it not for photographer Levi Betweise. He runs the Rescued Film Project, and in 2014 acquired the precious rolls. It was a difficult undertaking, but he managed to develop the old negatives, revealing a unique view of the world. Rust had gotten to some of the rolls. Who knows what would have happened to these films had Betweise not worked out his magic. The secret images were accompanied by notes from the snapper in question, though ultimately their identity remains a mystery. This photographer opened up a whole world to historians and researchers, one that would never have been discovered if it weren't for a brave anonymous soldier from 80 years ago. Number 3. Unexploded bomb in London. Britain's capital experienced serious bomb damage during the Blitz in the early days of World War II. Those days are thankfully over, though of course unexploded bombs still remain in obscure locations. One of these was dramatically found in East London as recently as 2015. Scary, right? The location was a basement in Bethnal Green, where building work was taking place. Authorities worked fast to secure the area and make sure people were safe. And this effort wasn't just to warn a few people, by the way. 700 people needed to be evacuated. They wound up spending the night in a school while a wide space was cleared around the site. The bomb, which weighed 500 pounds, 230 kilograms, had fallen from the sky decades ago and clearly not served its intended purpose. That deadly mission was nearly fulfilled in the 21st century. Experts pointed out that the device was still very dangerous. The bomb disposal team needed to carefully dig around the bomb and its fuse in order to finally deactivate it. Reports state this wasn't an isolated case that year. Bermondsey and Wembley, also in London, were found to have their own unexploded bombs also. I'm guessing these won't be the last ones though. Someday the last unexploded ordnance will be defused, but not at least for a few more years. Number 2. Wisconsin rocket. If your nerves aren't sufficiently shredded after that alarming story, then what about this next one? In 2016, a homeowner in the States got the shock of his life after deciding to have a clear-out. Venturing into his basement, Wisconsin resident Jim Thomas, who lives in the city of Fond du Lac, noticed something odd about one of his shelves. It looked like a regular shelf at first glance, but then Jim realized it had a fake top that could be opened up. Pretty crazy, no? His mind must have been racing, wondering what it was that it could possibly hide. We're betting he didn't expect to find a bazooka from World War II, though. Yes, Jim had been living on top of a deadly weapon this whole time. Even more worryingly, it was next to the support beams. So if anything had happened, he'd really have been in trouble. What was it doing there? Was a previous occupier a war collector? Or maybe just an insane person who figured they'd need access to a bazooka at some point? Either way, he needed to call the authorities, and fast. The police showed up to investigate, and everything got shut down while it was established whether the device was still ready to blast off. Luckily, it only had a training round inside. Still, the sight of it alone is enough to get anyone wetting their pants. Speaking of which, this isn't the only terrifying story to come out of this small Wisconsin town. Reports go on to say that an unexploded grenade was found in another Fond du Lac home. What is it with this place? And astonishingly, there was no pin. How was it prevented from blowing up? Why, rubber bands, of course, which were in the process of falling to pieces. You learn something new every day, though it doesn't always make it easier to sleep at night. Number 1. Nazi ice base. Our final entry is like something out of a movie. Did you know the Nazis were active in the Arctic? You'd find more than polar bears if you were exploring the North Pole back in the early 1940s. It isn't beyond the realms of possibility you might have bumped into a couple of German soldiers or scientists. What were they doing there? The forces of evil had descended on an island called Alexandra Land. They constructed a weather station there in 1942, which they named Treasure Hunter. But this wasn't some dull place where they checked out clouds all day. The stuff they were reporting on and sending back to the fatherland was vitally important. Can't fight a war in bad weather, right? Meteorologists mattered. Experts have speculated there was other business taking place at the station. Could the team have been digging for relics alongside all the forecasting? We'll probably never find out. What we do know is that the place was abandoned after people there got food poisoning. They were tucking into a juicy polar bear steak at the time. Seems like even the natural world was against the Nazis. The location lay dormant for years, until a group from Russia found it in 2017. Alexandra Land is part of the Russian Federation, and of course that country played a key role in making sure Adolf didn't get his way. So it's nice they managed to get in there for a look. Inside were 500+ items, such as bullets and the remains of bunkers. No evidence of digging equipment or ancient artifacts, but this was still pretty awesome. We're sure you'll agree. Thanks for watching. Are there any amazing unexpected military discoveries you think we left off the list? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.